But fundamentally, in a lot of your local leagues, you will see these guys on the waiver wire. I mean, what do you see with WCOF teams, or even in your own local leagues and experience that you see? I mean, do people have a tendency to go out and blow their wads early and overdraft these guys and waive perfectly good players that they drafted, or do you see more owners that kind of tend to stay put, or do you see a little bit of both?
Well, I think both is the answer. What you'll see is some inexperienced fantasy football owners who are scared to actually spend their money, and as a result, they're not going to take full advantage of the available free agents out there. For instance, Brandon Jackson is a guy you have to go get right now if you're a Ryan Grant owner. You can't wait unless you just have, for whatever reason, some great depth at running back. You cannot wait, and on a running back, you've got to go get Brandon Jackson. On the flip side, if you're a Kevin Kolb owner right now and you did have a decent backup, if you drafted Kolb, you probably have a quarterback like a Chad Henne or somebody like that, maybe a Joe Flacco, a very suitable backup. You don't have to go out and spend the money that it might take for you to get a Michael Vick. Now, Michael Vick, he is going to be the waiver wire darling for no doubt whatsoever in the WCOFF, because in many leagues, Brandon Jackson was drafted, whereas not so much is the case with Michael Vick. So we'll see Michael Vick be an active player. We'll also see the wide receiver in St. Louis, Mark Clayton, be a very popular waiver wire selection, and I'm not so sure that that's going to be a wise spend of money, because the issue there in the St. Louis Rams is still their offensive line and the rookie quarterback in Sam Bradford. So while Mark Clayton might be that number one option, I'm not sure that number one option means a whole heck of a lot right now in St. Louis.
Yeah, and they had a pretty favorable matchup there in the Week 1 game anyway. So in the WCOFF, there's not going to be as many guys available because you draft 20 deep. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are watching the show that just can't relate to that deep of a draft because so many different players, including these guys like Nene, are getting drafted, which in some of the local leagues here in the hometown that a lot of people have not heard of. So let's move on. I mean, so last week we had some big games. Obviously, we talked about Arian Foster already. I mean, I think the biggest surprise to everybody, I mean, it wasn't a surprise to me, was the Texans beating the Colts. I think we've seen that the Colts are now a mortal team, and they've kind of come back to the field now, and that maybe some of that new blood there in the AFC is going to be able to catch up to them.
Oh, I think so for sure. And the loss of Bob Sanders now potentially, again, is going to be very difficult for the Colts. While they learned how to play without Bob Sanders last year, they're still a different defense without Bob Sanders. And while Peyton Manning, he'll work his magic, he'll win you 3 or 4 games by himself. That may not be enough this year because the Texans have come to play, and they sure looked awfully good. The pass protection looked good. The run blocking looked good. Not even that Arian Foster looked great, but so did even Steve Slayton and Owen Daniels and Andre Johnson. And their team right now looks poised to finally get into playoffs and get over the hump there in Houston. Another player that I liked what I saw from was Matt Forte. He bounced back, I think, really well in this first game against the Lions while it was a close game, and they arguably shouldn't have won the game because of the catch there by Calvin Johnson. Matt Forte looked extremely good there in that Mike Martz offense.
Yeah, you beat me to the next guy I wanted to bring up. I think Matt Forte, I mean, we talk about every year, we talk about the 2 guys that come out, they're sort of had their one-year wonder, as we like to call them here on the show, and then the next year they stink, they get overdrafted, guys like Slayton and Forte last year, and then then they sort of come back the following year and have a bounce-back year. Certainly Forte looks like he's going to do that. Steve Slayton's going to be in a way harder position to do that there with Arian Foster just looking like he's out of control over there in Houston. It'll be interesting to see if the Redskins can contain him this week here in Washington. And then we have a couple of other guys that are a little bit of a surprise to see at the top. I mean, I find that you see a lot of surprise names every year in the NFL stats, weeks 1 and 2. You probably watched all the games. I only saw what I saw in the highlights because I was actually at the game. But it seemed like a lot of teams, and clearly the Bengals were one of them, that was really rusty, lots of penalties you saw with the Cowboys on the Sunday night game. And because of these facts, these sort of teams that are still in training camp mode, they kind of do come out and struggle, and they're slow out of the gates for the first couple of games. But then, which is why I don't like to give up on players, and then as the season progresses, you kind of get into more of a normal mode there.
Well, exactly. You'll see a lot of penalties you shouldn't see. And you'll see, look, Des Bryant, to me, looked lost out there with Dallas. It was obvious he was cutting off some of those routes a little bit short. And, I mean, look, Des Bryant, one of the criticisms of Des Bryant has been he's not going to be able to pick up the offense, a very complicated offense there of Jason, Garrett in Denver, in Dallas, and he's not going to be able to pick it up fast enough. And I saw that in his first game there, in Dallas. And so I'm concerned about, the Cowboys. just that whole NFC East to me is somewhat up in arms. I mean, for the Redskins to win that game was huge to protect their home field, but now with what's going on there in Philadelphia, potential quarterback controversy, the New York Giants might be the sleeping giant, no pun intended, if you will, but in that division.
Okay, well, how would you analyze or explain or look forward if you drafted a guy like Ryan Matthews or Sean Green, and you're using one of your first or second round picks? I mean, are these guys you should look to unload right now, or do you still think there's a chance that these guys can come back?
No, you can't unload those guys yet. I mean, Sean Green, not impressive at all. I mean, the whole New York Jets offense, for that matter, wasn't very impressive. And until Rex Ryan really opens it up a little bit, and they let Sanchez throw the football down the field, it's going to be hard for Sean Green and even for Tomlinson to have 8-9 guys in the box and expect them to actually get a running game going again. While the Jets had a fantastic running game last year, obviously, they're going to have to figure out something to fool these defenses, especially given the schedule they're going to play. Ryan Matthews, given his weak schedule, I think Ryan Matthews will be fine. And, obviously they're very disappointed in that loss there in Kansas City, but it's a very tough place to play. And Kansas City, similar to Houston, this is their game. They were up for this game big time, a very big game for them to be able to say, hey, we're not as bad as you thought we might be. And then while the Texans are trying to get in the playoffs, the Chiefs are trying to get back to respectability. And this is a big game for them towards that cause. Yeah, the weather certainly played to their benefit, as well as some timely mistakes by the Chargers there, and just really a Chargers team that just looked out of sorts there, for the weather or whatever. But we got to wind things down here. I'd like to take the second here to thank Dustin Ashby again for joining me here in studio again on very short notice. Robbie had to go out and cover a local football game here, so he is gone. But Dustin, it's been a pleasure. Thanks again for coming into the studio here and talking football with us. It's always a good time. It sounds like you had a really successful draft there in Vegas, and it just sounds like the WCOFF is getting bigger and better and more exciting and more popular every year. Well, thanks so much, and we're looking forward to doing it again. All right, Dustin. Hey, take care, buddy. We're going to drop off now. Hey, everybody, we just want to thank you guys for tuning in here to Fantasy Sports Review. It's a pleasure having Dustin Ashby here. We'll continue to have Dustin Ashby on as long as we can to talk about updates of the WCOFF as the season goes on. But from here in studio, all by myself here in the WCOFF empty draft room, I'm Phil Hargis, and we'd like to send things away till next week when we'll be back here to recap everything on Fantasy Sports Review.